Hey, presto. Nathan, you have a shitty joke for me?
I've got some jokes this week. Some jokes.
I guess. Well, you have me tied up here. Go ahead.
let me just clear my throat, get it ready, you know.
Are you okay, Nathan? Are you ready to hear a joke?
I'm so motherfucking ready for this episode.
Would you make me laugh? I make me laugh so hard.
Did you
Was she a great big funny person? Yes, she was, sir.
Did you hear that the kid from The Exorcist got a ticket from a police officer? Do you know what it was for? For possession.
Whoa! I was trying to figure that one out. I was like, Jay spider walking or something. I don't know.
Jay spider walking. Oh, okay, alright. I'll shut up after this one. I started downloading Jaws the other day, but after 1 megabyte, my computer died.
That one, like, almost doesn't even make sense, bro. Jesus Christ.
Oh my
These
God.
jokes sound like you have kids.
Oh, these dad jokes give me life. Well, it's debatable.
Speaking of debates, today we're doing something a little bit different.
I see what you did there.
So, as promised to you guys last week, we left today's episode up for a vote. And you chose Horror Gone Too Far.
Way too far, in my opinion.
So, this is a new segment we're introducing to the show called The SLAB. A spin-off where we prod, poke, and postulate a topic.
We do love postulating a topic.
So today we're doing Horror Gone Too Far, taboos that exist in the horror world and in the real world, I guess, also.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Nathan, we've kept what we think separate from each other. We've kept it secret.
We've completely hidden our sort of views on what we think each of these should be. We wanted to, like I was talking to you about this, like we want to get as much of a reaction from each other as possible. So I definitely have a few points I think you might be really interested in. And, there's definitely, and I think you said something that you're like very far on one side of the fence about this. So like, yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah. I have like one pinky, like just resting barely on top of the fence for one topic, but I don't feel it's not a hot take. I feel like I'm not breaking the mold with this opinion. Yeah. So, rape, murder, pedophilia, cannibalism. Wow. What are you going to do?
You shouldn't be laughing at this.
Horror Gone Too Far.
I think it's a very...
What say you, Nathan?
What say I? I have quite a lot to say about this, actually, because, I feel kind of very strongly about sort of like where everything kind of stands versus how far you can take people's... Like, there's only so far that you can take a person's reaction before you kind of get into what we would consider, you and I, what we would consider way too far. And in my opinion, the first kind of thing I really want to talk about is like the difference between superficial themes of going too far versus kind of, the really kind of set in themes. And the way I kind of always like to describe those superficial themes is, the usual stuff: gore, violence, kind of excessive violence, sexual violence, things like that. That kind of, like most movies are known for, Eli Roth's Hostel was way too far. Actually, it kind of wasn't. It was just a little bit of gore, and it's nothing.
That's the thing. I think I think it's all completely down to opinion. I feel like there are, like we were saying earlier, I feel like there is kind of a couple of very set taboos that like generally the world agrees upon, which is like rape, murder, cannibalism, pedophilia, killing your own parents, patricide, like that kind of thing. Those are kind of things that, like, for a long, long, long time have been kind of widely condemned throughout the world. There's not really like somewhere where somebody's like, oh, you know, like, this is up for debate, that this is a good thing.
Yeah.
But now I feel that within the realm of movies, especially horror movies, which is what we're here to talk about today,
Come through horror.
I feel like horror has the kind of freedom to kind of go too far, because it's almost the entire point is to make a satire of real life, but also display like real life horrors in a way and just kind of amp them up a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think in a genre where the entire point, it's literally in the title, I think when the entire point is to horrify or to make you feel uncomfortable or to make you unsettled, I feel generally nothing is off limits.
Yeah, I would agree. Where I think about sort of how far horror can really push that button depends on, at least from what I can see, is it depends on the generation that's viewing that horror. So, for example, I think you and I said it when we had my mom on as a guest for The Exorcist, where that me and you are sort of very desensitized to, there's very little that sort of freaks us out or takes us way too far. I mean, like, the only thing, like, we had an episode about Hereditary. In the past couple of years, I've only seen Hereditary as one of those films that sort of really pushes buttons, and it's not because of superficial reasons like I mentioned earlier. It's more for those themes of,
well, it breaks one of the cardinal rules of horror, and I feel cinema.
Yeah.
They kill a child in the movie, quite graphically, and they show the body. Kids die all the time, but so for instance, in Jaws, when we see Alex Kintner die, we hear him die, we hear him screaming under the water, but it's shot in such a way that you kind of don't almost even know what you're looking at. But with Hereditary,
they show you.
We see Charlie's head graphically. So yeah, for example, if Alex Kintner's body was to, as Murray Hamilton says in that movie, spill out all over the dock, if we were to see the body kind of shown, I can see why people might think like something like that could be too far. But I don't have that opinion. I feel like it's kind of like an evolutionary thing of people feel like we need to protect children, and children are kind of like off limits when it comes to horrific things like this. But I think like not showing those things in movies, especially horror movies and media, it kind of pretends like they don't happen. Where
so when it comes to, like I was saying earlier, those superficial themes like showing like the death of a child and things like that, it can turn people off very quickly from it, because you know, in horror movies and things like you said, like that's a taboo rule where kids don't die in films. But like once you remove that barrier, it almost takes horror into a very real world situation, because in the real world, like, these types of things do happen. We can't shy away from it just because of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, to me, it says like a child's death or something like that, or like when they kill the dog or something like that, where these are kind of cardinal unspoken rules in cinema in general. I feel that once one of those rules is broken, I'm kind of like, ooh, I'm in. I'm kind of drawn in a little bit more to be like, okay, so they're obviously not playing by the rules. They've unchained themselves a little bit. Okay, we've spoken about this a million times. I want to see Pennywise eat a fucking baby.
I knew this was gonna come up. I knew it.
I've said it a million times. That cut from the first chapter was theorized to be used for the second chapter's opening. I want to see that, especially like with that series in particular. That taboo is already broken because Pennywise feeds specifically on children. So I feel like people are like, okay, you can kill a kid, but it's like if you kill a baby, you're fucking sick in the head. I wish somebody would kind of have the balls to do it.
So like, I see the whole kind of taboo or the no-nos of horror as a sort of very 3 levels. So the first level is, like I said, the very superficial ones where you have gore, you have blood, blah, blah, blah. The second one is sort of kind of ranging on kind of racism, pedophilia, rape, that kind of thing. And then the third level is where they're sort of built into the film, where they're sort of not so much like acting or blah, blah, blah. It's sort of building in themes of, you know, everyday life. And like we said with Hereditary, you have social anxiety, you have family problems, you have mental illness, all of that grief. Like, these are the things that everyday horrors, like, where you are sort of very you're very scared to sort of talk about these things, but because it's in horror, it's almost given a pass, where you're just like, you suspend your disbelief for an hour, 2 hours, depending on what you're watching, in order to experience those themes. And then, like I said, like we both said, like we wanted to come out of that film chain smoking because like we felt we needed it. So like I think there's a huge difference between things like The Evil Dead versus like Under the Skin, which works on the whole theme of apathy. And like in that film, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, Under the Skin is fucking beautiful. Another A24 gem of a film. Scarlett Johansson is an alien. Well, she's kind of an alien. I'm not really 100% sure on that, but she's kind of an alien, and she ends up leaving a child where both her parents have drowned in the ocean, and the child literally, like, it just shows the apathy and the violence towards, like what you said earlier, is the violence towards children. Like, that child is only like a toddler, and it's sitting there screaming in the dark, in the cold, like it's going to die. So like these types of things they're very strong, and you sort of work on them from a point of view where you go in sort of expecting a certain amount, and then all of a sudden you see something like that and you're like, oh, okay, this is really kind of it's another type of upsetting you, you know, like it brings you to a heightened sense of insecurity and fear. And that's why I think it's also a kind of gem where you think things are too disturbing or too not scary, but just you have a heightened sense of terror because certain things like the death of children happen in horror, you know?
That's what I was just going to say. In particular, the death of children, especially like an infant, like a baby, brings horror to whatever movie it's in, whether it's horror or not. Yes. Like, for example, like Trainspotting, where they find the baby having died of malnourishment. Yeah. That's genuinely horrific, and they kind of use that for a horror scene where the baby is just like crawling on the ceiling. This is going to sound kind of counterintuitive, but I feel like when something is quote too far, if you push it just a little bit further, people can kind of digest it a little bit more, because it then becomes over the top. It then becomes like with Evil Dead uses like a stupid amount of blood and a stupid amount of splatter, but because of how over the top and camp it is, because there's such a ridiculous amount, people don't really go, oh, versus seeing like a medical horror or like a medical kind of gore where somebody's getting a piece of their skin cut open and it's minimal gore, but it fucks you realistic, up more. Exactly, easier to digest, therefore making it more horrific to people. You know, it's more real world.
I totally get that, because there's certain scenes, like I was talking about earlier, Hostel. Yes, it is very superficial themes of going too far or too disturbing where you see gore more, but there are certain shots in that, in particular, the children when they whack your man's head in, or when that tourist guy gets his ankles slit from corner to corner.
Oh, he just gets the Achilles tendon caught, and then like you show it. Yeah,
it's very like much that kind of, you know, the way when someone like hits your kneecap, or like you kind of mentally feel that anguish or pain yourself.
That's one of those, another weird taboo where like torture has been around for a very, very long time. People have just kind of fluctuated in how much they care about it or not, you know? Torture in movies is one of those things that like genuinely kind of doesn't affect me. It's never really done in quite a realistic way. You know, it's always a little bit over the top where you can kind of be like, oh, like whatever. You know?
I agree there. When it comes to excessive violence and things like that, like the first film that always comes to mind is The Last House on the Left, the original, the 80s film, specifically because it mixes those two tones of, those two themes of, number one, obviously rape, sexual violence, and then the second one is gratuitous nudity and gratuitous violence. And I think it sort of placates again to that era of the whole video nasties era, because like you mentioned Evil Dead, that was also one of the biggest video nasties in the UK.
Video nasty.
That really kind of, like I said like earlier, I think you and I, our generation, are very desensitized to violence and things like that, because we sort of see it quite regularly on the media and things like that. So when it comes to films, it's not laughable, but it's almost just like, oh yeah, and but in the 80s,
it's like a whatever, like somebody has to fully be like Pan's Labyrinth beating somebody's face in with a bottle kind of thing. Makes me a little bit like, ooh, you know. I'm never really turned off by it, because like a lot of my favorite movies are excessively violent. That that balance of too far versus over the top to the point where you're going to laugh is very, very fine.
Yeah.
I find it's very, very weird, you know?
Yeah. This is something like I've kind of been playing with when it comes to the our particular topic this week is how does horror in the modern era now go too far? Because like I was saying earlier, the kind of modern desensitization towards death and violence and things like that is so overrated that the whole kind of theme to going too far and generational kind of terror, I should say, is something that I kind of take a firm stance on, because there's an era between, I want to say it's the 50s right up till around the mid yeah, pretty much the kind of mid I want to say the mid 70s onwards, because after that The Exorcist came out, all of these types of things, and then the era of the 80s where films, they literally had, what's her name, Thatcher kind of like put out this whole idea where we really need to like uncensor everything and blah blah blah, but she still turned around and she had snatch squads, they were called, and they went into VHS.
Oh, what's all this then? You got any Sam Raimi in the back of your car, love? Yeah, you know.
They literally had what they called snatch squads going in and like raiding video stores and taking these things down off the shelves, because does violence beget violence? So that whole like, does video games beget violence? Do horror films beget violence? All of this kind of thing.
I genuinely don't think so. I'm going to use a quote from Scream here, that it's like movies do not create psychos, they just make psychos more creative.
Yes.
I think if somebody's going to be violent, they're going to be violent regardless.
Yes.
You know, I think like my stance on this is, when it comes to censorship of any kind, it's either all okay or none of it is okay.
Yes.
If you pick and choose and kind of nitpick, you turn into a Margaret Thatcher, and everybody fucking hated that bitch. So
yeah, it's
you know?
like sort of like those whole main themes that they were very, very worried about in that era was number one, obviously gratuitous violence. Gratuitous nudity was a huge problem in that.
Margaret, I know you got titties underneath that blue coat. You fucking.
One of the films that was like one on the top of their list was Cannibal Holocaust.
With Cannibal Holocaust, I think a lot of reason why people feel like that movie goes too far is because they kill real animals on screen and
there's a lot of
show
violence.
It in full. A lot of people also were under the assumption that movie was a snuff film.
Yeah, they were saying that
people
had died.
That it was real.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They went very Blair Witch with it, where as far as I remember,
it's the original.
cast was kind of,
it's the original found footage film. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people, were under the assumption that this was real, that this was actually footage found somewhere out in the Amazon jungle. And the director, as far as I remember, was like under investigation, and
he was tried.
The crew.
And the only way he could profess his innocence was to bring the actual actors out of hiding, because they were contracted to not apply for any gigs since that movie came out.
Yeah.
So.
And they did do that same thing with Blair Witch, which perfection. Like it was used so well, because it really, really had people thinking that like this man recorded all this stuff. Because actually watching Cannibal Holocaust, the effects in it are kind of stellar.
They're very good.
Very, very, very realistic. There's that one where I think it's the first body they see when they're kind of approaching the village of the woman on the spike.
Yeah. Where
it's just coming up through her mouth, and that used to be the header for Best Gore. Do you remember that site?
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be that for that website. That, to me, when I saw that, it looked real. It looked so real. I can very definitely understand why people would be like, what the fuck am I watching? Is this smut? Because only a couple of scenes ago, we saw somebody crack open and fillet a turtle alive.
Yeah.
You know?
There's quite a kind of stretch with that film, specifically because there was, number one, there was animal cruelty in it. Animals were killed on screen. It is very, very distressing to watch those scenes. Being a vegetarian, it can be very hard to kind of not just watch those scenes, but like also the other scenes with the natives, the indigenous people, because they were forced into a flaming hut and they were forced to kind of cower in it before, like, you know, production had to stop to, you know, put out the flames. This kind of thing, in my opinion, like the real kind of horrors to that are sort of more disturbing and more scary once you realise what you're actually seeing on film is very real. It's authentic reactions as well, which only further makes it more creepy.
It's exploitation.
Exactly. You know, it's definitely, it's the era of exploitation, yeah. Which is something...
And like not even in like an exploitation film kind of way, like actual exploitation of people.
Yeah. They had this sort of thought process back then. I mean, like, I was looking at, like, newspaper articles, and I was looking at titles and things, like they had things like Stamp Out This, and they called the Evil Dead, they called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Cannibal Holocaust the rape of young minds. In that
Which is
era,
actually wild when you hear all the criticisms of Texas Chainsaw, and you actually watch Texas Chainsaw, and so much of it is the implication.
yes, that was actually
Like,
something I really wanted to talk
is
about.
largely a bloodless movie, and I actually do want to get back to Cannibal Holocaust real quick, kind of linking it to The Green Inferno, which is basically
It's
Cannibal
essentially
Holocaust.
the same film.
Almost shot for shot. What would Cannibal Holocaust be if it was made today? And I think Eli Roth did a good job of being shocking. I know you have notes on this as well, so like, don't be afraid to like hop in or anything. One of the members that kind of like lands in the jungle is being dismembered, and they don't cut away. They don't quiet his screams at all. He's, for lack of a better word, like squealing like a pig the entire time. They hack off legs, and they show each leg coming off, and they hack off arms to the shoulder, and they pull out a tongue, and then they rip out the eyes, and they eat it. He's alive the entire time. He doesn't die at all until I think they put the head off.
Yeah, again, it sort of works on the whole gratuitous violence thing, because Eli Roth, specifically him, he is known for gratuitous violence. I mean, he's had it since like the very, very beginning. But definitely, if you have not watched The Green Inferno, I mean, we've just spoiled part of it for you. And if you are going to watch it, don't expect it to be some easy joyride to watch, because it is very, very hard to watch. It's extremely bloody, it's extremely gory, but also for the theme of the kids are going there in order to protect the forest because it's being cut down. But then you sort of realize, again, it's sort of a mirroring effect of what Cannibal Holocaust was, because you find out that the film crew themselves were just as evil, if not more fucked up and evil. The kids want to go down there for the best of reasons, but they're doing it for very superficial reasons, because they want to be seen doing it, not because they want to do it. They just want to be seen that they're good people.
It's like the equivalent of giving a homeless person money and taking a video of it.
And taking a video, exactly. So this is my...
Just say that you've done it, that you actually want to help.
It's very much my opinion of films like this, where they have a deeper meaning to them, and this is why Eli Roth's Green Inferno is something that always springs to mind, because it is disturbing, but it's disturbing for the reasons that you don't think. They're not the superficial tongue getting ripped out, ants crawling all over the guy getting eaten. It's more for the reasons that you expect, that the natives weren't the bad people all the time. It's really society in general.
In that movie, it wasn't just that old trope of like, these natives are crazy savages. It's like, well, no, you just showed up. You know what I mean? And like, you're the protagonist of the story.
Yeah.
You're the antagonist.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Along with Tom Six, he did the Human Centipede series.
Yeah.
I feel like he's the only ones where he's kind of made it his thing.
Yeah.
There's that one scene that comes to mind in Cabin Fever, the original. The girl is in the bath and she's shaving her legs, and she does it once and it kind of goes past, and then she does it again. It sounds like somebody's peeling an apple. It's just like holes in her leg, and she kind of keeps doing it just to be like, it's fine, it's good, it's fine, I'm gonna have like smooth legs, whatever. But by the time she's finished, the bathroom is it's covered in blood.
The use of sound to take films just that little bit over the edge. There was a film, it's not particularly a horror film, but it's the French film, just Irreversible in English, but it stars Monica Bellucci, deep friend of the pod. It's a relationship-based film, and it only spirals like really out of it in the last like, I want to say 40 minutes of the film, if you even get that far into it. Yeah, it's the sound that they use. They wanted to use frequencies that the human ear, that you can't actually hear, but the human brain and the ear can register it. And it just induces anxiety, depression, and it can sometimes induce vomiting. The film is extremely, extremely hard to watch. Purely for some of those reasons.
I long to be like thrilled by movies, or I miss that kind of fear, and this is completely down to desensitization.
Yeah,
like we've both been watching horror movies like literally since we were children, our entire lives. So
I used to watch them as cave shadows.
Yes.
If you can't read yourself.
Hey, if you can't read. No, I crave that like intense fear that intense disgust that I used to get from movies when I was like much younger, and it doesn't happen anymore. So when something can kind of come along that makes me be like, oh shit, I kind of really do appreciate that.
When you kind of take things further, there's only so far that you can think of, like I said, with the superficial kind of themes, but when you get further into those level 3 themes of like mental illness, racism, all of that kind of thing, it's sort of like you were saying earlier, it sort of pulls you in more to the film. It kind of grasps you by the shoulders and kind of yanks you into the cinema more, in my opinion. When it comes in terms of like racism and things like that, like you have, number one, the original thing I can think of is Candyman and Jordan Peele's Get Out, because those two films, in my opinion, were very, very strong when it kind of wants to work those levels, not dancing around the issue, but incorporating them very clearly into the film and using them to the film's strength. Not that they're particularly disturbing.
That is the horror of those movies.
Is racism.
I feel like Candyman, it's a little weird because I don't think Candyman was actually written with Candyman being a black man. I think that was like interpreted for the movie, which I actually do think amps that story up a whole lot.
It does. It charges it very strong.
Exactly, and it makes Candyman more of a tragic character.
Yes.
Like, Get Out, a lot of people were kind of labeling it, like when the trailers were coming out, as like white people, the horror movie, you know what I mean? Where it's just like the horror is white people. But it's like, no, it's like, it kind of goes into something a lot deeper. It's not just racism
I like to refer to it as the trauma of racism rather than just like, oh, you're this and we don't like you because you're this. It's the reactionary experience of being black or being white. It's that sort of the tension, that subpar level tension that is always there, and I think it's very well incorporated into that film. And not to mention the fact that the main character, he pulls himself out of, what is it called? It's not the further, the sunken place, by literally picking cotton from the chair that he's being strapped into to cover his ears. It's such a strong way to kind of bring across an issue without kind of like throwing it in your face. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that the movie was made very, very, very well.
Yes, very successful.
Like the use of symbolism in that movie is like kind of impeccable.
Yes.
Because it's like it told the story without being like, here it is, and this is what I'm trying to tell you.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It's like it kind of entices you to just look a little bit further and dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
To kind of find these things, because even the way that that same scene, even the way he gets out.
Yes.
The book skull. I think we'll talk about that more in a future episode, because that actually.
It's a very, very strong kind of opinion on it. Yeah. It's very, very good. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to kind of bring up was the use of the themes of dread and the themes of body horror, because those are some things that like really kind of, in my opinion, push a film very, very well. With dread, the first thing, there's really kind of two films that kind of come to mind. Number one is Robert Eggers' The Witch, specifically because that film, like, number one, very little good shit happens in that film. In fact, I don't think literally anything good happens in that film. Spoiler alert, there's actually a witch. Yeah, there you go.
Cute.
It's very bleak. The color palette is so off.
All
and
natural
like the
lighting.
music, all natural lighting. It gives that sense of
The
claustrophobia.
score, it's perfect. Like, when they first arrived to the
woods, yeah.
The raising voices. We actually spoke about this last week.
That's choral singing, voice
it's
raising.
That thing of just constant elevation with no payoff. Kind of trains your mind to be like what's going to happen? Like, when is it the hit? But if that sound, and it's all choral, which kind of implies like hell, heaven. It implies something bigger.
Yeah.
You know? And then at the end, that score where it's just all the witches, I think it's called the Witches' Sabbath, like at the end.
Oh, that kind of guttural shouting that they have. Yeah.
Yeah, all the women like yelling. I think that really, really adds to it.
Yeah.
It's an excellent made movie.
I like the fact that when Robert Eggers kind of shot that, like you said, it's very natural lighting. It just kind of seems like you never kind of see the house from an angle where it's not towards the forest, if that makes sense. I do know that the house
point is to show like how alone and how like enveloped they are
by the forest, by darkness, by isolation, and like again, that's a very strong theme in that movie is isolation. It's very it's subtle, but like Exactly. Like they're cast out from society, and they're basically put to death. They're like, if you once you're gone, you're gone. You're going to die out there. And when they
well, then you don't get to be a Puritan and hang out,
yeah.
dickhead. Okay.
It's such a very strong kind of theme, and that's why like Dread works really, really well with that film, because like it's really like it's also like suspicion of each other. Like, did they do that? Did they do that? Did she steal the cup? Are you really a witch? All of this kind of thing that fucks you up and like never really kind of makes you feel good ever.
No, and like even if I feel like The Witch could have been made even without a witch in it. Does that make sense?
I
like,
agree with you there.
They never were outcast. There's a lot of that movie that's kind of like hinted at. Like
Eden Lake was another one that I constantly reference. I know that you haven't particularly seen this film, and I don't want to spoil it for you as well.
But I know, like, go ahead, because like we were discussing this very briefly last night. I get the vibe that it's very Straw Dogs, Last House on the Left.
Yes. Yes.
Hunter kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very much how would I explain it? It's, you know, the French film Them. It's sort of very that, but it's out in the woods. Yeah. This couple go out into the woods for, I think it's their honeymoon. I can't really remember, but I think it's their honeymoon. They go out into the woods and they want to enjoy their time there and blah blah blah, camping, whatever. And then this huge gang of youths like fuck them up continuously. You know,
old man.
It continuously gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It gets more graphic. The violence becomes a lot stronger. There are deaths, and like the ending to that film is just so fucking bleak, and it says so much about like it almost kind of implies like youth these days again are very desensitized to violence. They're just kind of like, yeah, whatever, and like that's where it plays into.
You refer to young people as youths. Just for everybody out there, Nathan's the kind of person that would yell at somebody to get off his lawn and shake the fist in the air. Get off my lawn, you kids.
Yeah, definitely.
Nathan is the kind of person that says, back in my day, you know.
Fuck off. I get it, bitch. I'm old.
These youths, these hoodlums, the youth of today.
They're very much, these two films would be very much on the list. If you haven't seen them, I definitely recommend watching these two for the specific theme of dread, pushing a horror film a little bit too much in a direction where you don't particularly want to continue watching it.
Revenge movies, I feel like, are quite special because when somebody has something like that done to them in a movie, or even in real life, I suppose, when the tables kind of flip and the victim then becomes the victimizer and then becomes the one doing the horrific things, I feel like we're a little bit more like, yeah, fucking get, like, you know what I mean? We feel a little bit more, because it's a revenge, it's not a violence for no reason. You feel a little bit more behind the person, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it doesn't seem as horrific when somebody's like avenging something, or like, for example, like Last House on the Left, the parents,
that kind of muddies the waters, that film, in my opinion, because it switches from the hunter becoming the hunted.
At the end, the parents become like just as horrific as the rapists, like as the original three.
Yeah.
And I'm very much so of like, yeah, fuck them up, like get them, because it's a revenge thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that line is kind of varied, where people are like, yeah, but these people have become just as bad. It kind of goes back to that age-old thing of like an eye for an eye.
The other kind of thing I mentioned there was body horror.
Moving swiftly on.
Yeah,
Anyway,
the other thing I kind of wanted to mention was the usage of body horror to take a film way too far. And like, I have a quick kind of selection of films, things off the top of my head. Like, I mean, you mentioned it earlier: The Evil Dead, The Fly, Raw, The Thing, Cabin Fever, you mentioned
Raw.
earlier.
Raw was really...
Raw, in my opinion, I had to turn off. It was definitely a film where I think, for me, it took it a little too far.
You turned it off?
I did. I did think it took it a little too far for me.
The French disturb you, bro. French New Wave horror disturbs you.
Oh, I tell you, we'll get. I'll get into. We have a selection process later on. You'll love it. You'll love our selection. Yeah, I turned it off. I think it was good 35, maybe 40 minutes in, and I couldn't kind of stick it.
Honestly, if you had gone to see that, would you have walked out?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know, because then it's the whole kind of, well, I paid my $14 to get in here. I might as well get the most out of it, kind of, So I don't know. Yeah. So
speaking of walking out and body horror, the Suspiria remake. That's one of the only movies that I've ever been to.
We're going there, aren't we?
We're going there. First mention of Suspiria on the podcast. I think that scene, it didn't go too far. I think they played it just straight enough and showed. Okay, I'm going to say too much, but too much to me doesn't always necessarily mean bad. I watched the scene again, more than a couple of times.
Yeah.
And
we watched people get up and leave. There was first there was one person, then it was a couple, and then
11
there was 10 or 11 people. You and we were sitting there and we were just fucking punk ass
arms
hoes.
crossed. Yeah, exactly. Fucking baby, what a baby. Yeah. But no, that scene...
We saw that in Halloween, by the way. Fucking sick,
yeah, we got
dude.
A sneak preview. That was lit. But that scene in particular, we see everything happening, and there's almost no cutaways. We see Olga get literally broken and bent in half.
Yes.
Multiple different ways and multiple different times. And then we see her piss all over herself, and we hear her not really being able to breathe, kind of gurgling and stuff like that. And then knowing that she's still alive at the end, that was very, very graphic. And a good use. And it was bloodless. There's no blood in that scene. I think if they had made it so that she actually broke in half, or one of her legs came off or something like that, I might have thought it was a little bit less. But it's the fact that she's horrifically injured but still alive. That's what I think made people be like, fuck. Because most of them people got up before the scene was even over.
Yeah. It does go on for a good, I want to say...
8 minutes or something.
Yeah, good 7-8 minutes. It's pretty, It's not graphic enough to really kind of push it in my opinion, but it is that kind of level where it does start to make... I want to say it kind of makes you squirm a little in your seat. You kind of
Oh, it did. Did you feel horrible for this girl?
Yeah. It kind of takes it to a place where you're like, I feel and then it continues afterwards where they hook her and they pull her into the witch's den beneath the dance academy.
Still alive. It's so disturbing. It's so good. If you haven't seen this, just picture a pretzel made out of a girl.
Pretzel Olga.
Happy International Women's Day, everybody. Yeah.
Oh my god. Pretzel Olga will definitely that's going up on the pod, that for sure. Pretzel Olga. Oh my god.
So body horror, you were saying. Corruption of the flesh.
Corruption of the flesh. This sort of leans into the whole kind of Lovecraftian kind of era thing, but the one that really does kind of always do it for me is The Thing. When I think of body horror, it's either The Fly, David Cronenberg's The Fly, or John Carpenter's The Thing. So those type of films really kind of take it there for me, where I always remember my brother, who hopefully we'll have on the podcast. My brother always kind of says several opinions on that film where there's several scenes where he can't kind of watch, and he says the scene with the guy having the heart attack on the table.
Oh, the stomach.
Yeah.
Yes.
He says he can't watch it specifically because, number one, obviously the stomach opens up with teeth, and then your man is literally waving around with up to his elbows, having lost his hands to the jaws.
Had that actor with no arms on set.
It's such a strong, iconic image in my head that I would totally agree that those types of scenes, and then what happens afterwards and everything that crawls up onto the ceiling and the guts and everything like this.
The thing that disturbs me in that movie is the scene with the
thing.
yeah. The thing that disturbs me in that movie most is the scene with the dogs.
It kind of opens up like a flower kind of thing.
It opens up like a flower, and then the dog's skull just kind of slides in and out. Falls right out. Like with something. Like when, that just kind of gets to me. When we see animals being tortured, even more so than like human children, I'm like,
it's a no-no.
Yeah. But there's certain body horror scenes that get me that are in stupid movies, like Slither, right? When they find that big woman in the barn, and she's just like, she's literally so the size of a barn.
Yeah.
But she's like, my thing, I remember like trying to like make sense of that when I was a kid, where I was like, where's her skeleton? Is she just like, is her skeleton like separated from her skin on the inside? And then she's kind of being like rocked back and forth, and then she just splits at the sides. But we see the like layers of skin rip, and then we see the yellow of like fat underneath, and then we see that separate, and she just comes apart. That like kind of messed me up as a kid, and I like that movie is like kind of whatever to me, but like that scene in particular, I was like, fuck, like this lady is like still alive. She's just stretched to max capacity. Like she literally bursts. It's fucking, it's crazy.
It ain't the nicest. It ain't it ain't exactly the prettiest thing to watch. And so like,
I love I'm one of those people that it's like, whatever you want to show me on screen, especially in a horror movie, I'm very much so a champion of like, let it fucking rain blood. I want to see it all. I want to see people being ripped limb from limb. I want to see people being lit on fire. I want to see like Audition. I want to see fucking pins being put in eyes. I want to see people fed vomit. I want to see people getting their fucking own feet cut off. You know, I want to see it all. Like I want that reaction of me being like, oh shit. And thus far, nothing has ever made me get up and leave the room.
I would agree there. I think there's certain films that I have watched and I sort of won't watch again, specifically for reasons that are like they would be upsetting sort of to watch. One that always kind of pops into my head with kind of like the death of minors and like excessive violence and things like that is the film Creep. There's a specific scene. There's this woman, and she falls asleep on the tube in the London Underground, and she finds out that there's this kind of cryptid guy stalking her around the tunnels. She has to literally wait. I mean, it's not possible nowadays. That would not happen. But she would have to wait until the morning when the early people open up. And there's the scene where they meet a homeless couple, and the woman
they're living inside of the walls.
They're living inside the walls, yeah. And she's pregnant, and the creepy guy comes in, and he ends up terminating the pregnancy in the most disgusting way possible. I ended up watching that film right to the end. I did watch it, but I was with my mother at the time, and I think obviously it's sensitivity to women and things like that. But it's the whole kind of thought process behind like, there's a pregnancy and a life just got lost. And again, it's like that death of children, the death of minors, and excessive violence that kind of puts that movie...
Even like violence against mothers, people tend to really like have an issue with. Like in the original...
We sort of avoid it.
The remake of The Hills Have Eyes, there's the kind of death of the grandmother and the mother, and they take the baby.
Yeah.
And that kind of... A lot of these kind of taboos or social kind of rules that we all go by are all kind of very ancient things.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like they all go back to like
there's primal
things.
fears as well, you know?
Exactly. It's like the idea that children should not be harmed is like
ancient.
An animalistic thing. That's just in the back of everybody's head.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like the fear of harm coming against like a mother or something like that is also a very like instinctual thing. Is like your mother is like the first person that you're in contact with, you know. You don't want any kind of like thing like that. So when we see like a perversion of that, like with like Night of the Living Dead, looking at the poster on my wall, you get kind of patricide where the child kills the parents. And not only kills the parent but eats the parent. It's like a weird perversion of like kind of rules, and I can't actually imagine how people would have felt seeing that in the 60s when that came out.
That's actually another one that I should have actually mentioned when it comes to the theme of racism and things like that, because that film is a very clear monopoly on the theme of racism, especially with the ending.
Not intentionally, though.
Not intentionally, I suppose, but
that wasn't cast as a black man. It just kind of, George Romero says like he just was the best actor, and I think it just adds a whole other level. And I think like it is one of those things. The imagery is so charged, it's so loaded, and it's like the time that it was in. You know, I think that if that movie was made now, you really could play it with any race in there, and it wouldn't necessarily make your mind go there. But for the time, and for who it was, and for who it is that do the shooting, it's
very clear what it's indicating. Let's be fair.
Exactly. And then there's like a weird struggle in that movie where Barbara is kind of, she gets to the house and she's like almost like, oh, he's
she's apprehensive of him.
Exactly, like that all like leads into the horror as well, you know.
The last kind of point that I really kind of wanted to kind of push forwards was kind of like I said there, the whole kind of intergenerational expectations of what horror is. So like what we have now,
what this show is.
Well, exactly.
Two generations coming together.
Fuck off. Go fuck yourself.
Nathan is like 2 years older than me. In human years. Now, in true years, Nathan is... If you cut off Nathan's leg and looked at the rings, only then will we be able to tell how old he actually is.
The whole kind of like ultimate point that I really want to push on this intergenerational thought process as to what horror, what constitutes taking horror too far. And I think it really is because of, I think you even said this when we were talking about The Exorcist, was because of what came before us. And you said you would have loved to have been around for that, like that cultural zeitgeist of that whole thought process of changing someone's opinion on something.
To be shocked by things so, by today's standards, so mundane.
Like
the only thing that was actually genuinely shocking, which is a point I'll make in a few minutes, I think the only thing that to me that is genuinely shocking that they actually had in that movie is they show a child masturbating with a crucifix and then shoving her mother's face down there. You could never get away with that in modern cinema.
Yeah, it's because during like obviously the 30s and 40s and 50s, it's kind of World War II era, where the violence you were seeing wasn't, number one, mainly on screen because televisions weren't kind of widely available, but like you were hearing it consistently through the radio about like the horrors of war and all of these kinds of things. It was only sort of after that where everything sort of kind of like, you know, late 50s, 60s, early 70s, where everything was sort of very mellow, very kind of flower power and things like that, and where you get to the mid 70s and 80s, and that's when you really start to see a resurgence of what we would see as like the classics of horror and like what we've already retrospective. That violence. Exactly, like you get this, and like I was saying, because it was that whole era of the satanic panic, so like anything that was like slightly kind of off color, or you know, this or that, you would kind of push it away, like, no, we don't talk about that, we're gonna. So that's what you get with
with like Vietnam. We're going there. Okay, first mention of Vietnam. I think like with Vietnam, a lot of people kind of always talk about that like the time and place and everything that was, it kind of brought violence to people's living room because people were seeing graphic images of war on the news, in like photography in the newspaper and stuff. So I think like that was in real time and in real world desensitizing people to horror. I know Tom Savini says that like Tom Savini served in Vietnam, right? And he said that like he was in the medical like thing, so like suturing wounds, taking photographs of all this kind of stuff like that. And he said like that's kind of what like got him to do these things. So it's like that war and that entire time like directly have correlation with the type of violence and the type of gore that we see on screen, because it's real, it's quote unquote realistic gore. Do you know what I mean? It's not a joke. When we see somebody being ripped apart in Day of the Dead, it's all there for you to see. There's no cutaway. We really see guts. We see people really being torn apart.
Yeah. Like, you would get, and like I said earlier, it's like you would get the satanic panic, you get like the Manson family that you had mentioned, and all these kinds of things where you would get children, things like that. You would get the parents of those children saying like, no, we can't watch this because it would join you into the Manson family,
Charles,
or like
Charles
you would,
Manson, how are you doing?
Charles
Yo, bitch, get up
Manson.
here.
It would turn you into like a Satan worshipper and things like that. And like the thing was, because everything was so mellow in that decade, or those prior decades, then the subsequent 70s, the 80s, and all that, is because people were so consistently bored with what they were seeing that they needed like a form of escape from what they were living through. And that's why I think the generation, like I was saying with the video nasty era, was where, oh god, what was her name? Mary Whitehouse. Yeah, she was the one who coined the term video nasty. And Thatcher obviously like kind of pushing against it. They were very much kind of pushing against it because, again, it was seen the youth of that time were saying, listen, we kind of need this in order to escape the life, the mundane reality that we have. And that's why the older generation were pushing against it, because they didn't grow up with that. And that's why I think now that we are the younger generation, or at least you are, now that we are the younger generation...
You look at that older generation, and it's like these older generations, because like these people that were alive, like Thatcher and all these people who were really pushing for this kind of censorship, those are the people that lived through like those two great wars, two of the world wars, which are arguably like two of the most violent things that have ever happened and ever will happen in human history. Like, we've never been through anything like that, like to that scale. Obviously things go on in the world, but I think it is weird to see that, like, they think like, but they didn't have those graphic, like, violent movies in like 1910 or like at the very start of last century, you know, and those things still happened, you know. But now when you look at, we have access to all these things. If I wanted to see somebody get cut open from fucking groin to sternum, I can do that right now. Like, it's that easily accessible. I think, like, you're right, it does work as kind of an escape almost, you know.
It also just kind of puts into context like our whole kind of topic discussion now as to like what constitutes nowadays taking horror too far, because what has already gone too far in decades prior to us, like, it's already it's all being done. So like like, we're very much, like you were saying when we were talking to my mother, it's like we're very desensitized to it, we're very kind of meh, you know, whatever. It does kind of go back to that, like, I'm looking for more than just those superficial themes now of blood and guts, you know?
Exactly. We need things that, like, kind of... I think that's why you and I appreciate, for lack of a better term, like, A24 horror, because, like, I feel like...
It's intelligence.
It's intelligence, and they go into things that are, like, real-life horror, like dealing with the loss of a loved one, dealing with suicide, or...
mental illness.
Relationships.
Relationships.
Or exactly,
anxieties.
all things like this. That are all like real-life horrors that, like, you do experience. I think those are things that really make you feel like, oh, God. Like, they're relatable, which is scary. That's the scary thing, you know, versus, like, I know that, like, as much as I might be creeped out having a quote-unquote cigarette out the back at, like, 3 a.m., as much as I might be creeped out at the idea of some winged creature snatching me out of the sky, I know my brain doesn't allow myself to think, like, that could really happen. It's just something in the back of the head. But the fear of a family member dying, the fear of anxiety, the fear of anything like that are things that really, really get to you, that really do kind of, like, keep you up at night, versus thinking that there's some fucking creature in your wardrobe or something like that, you know what I mean? Okay, so kind of starting to wrap this whole episode up, I want to ask you, what one thing has to happen in a movie in order for you to say, oh, that's it, I don't want to watch this anymore? What is that one thing for you to be like, oh, no, I don't want to watch that? Like, what makes it go too far for you?
Like, given, like, what I said earlier about, like, the whole kind of referencing creep and things like Raw, I think there's a certain emotional level to a response that certain films kind of put in me. I suppose, like, call it my upbringing or call it this or whatever. I think it's just the excessive violence towards, like, just disturbing kind of reaction that you can give someone via the extinguishing of life in the worst way possible. Like, I mean, the end of Eden Lake is definitely a scene that kind of makes it extremely hard to watch. So what about you then? I'm gonna turn that question on you, bitch. What do you think?
Okay.
How do you like it now? What was the reason? What was the reason?
Dead babies was the reason. No. No, I think as long as something is in a movie, I think violence against children or as an extension of that mother is kind of like doesn't super bother me. I think when there's like an explicit kind of sexualization or an explicit inference of sexual violence against a child, I think that's when it starts to get a little bit like
a la Hard Candy, a Serbian film, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, see, with Hard Candy, that's another one where the victim becomes the victimizer as well, where you kind of feel like she's almost a little bit vindicated because you feel like she's doing it out of a sense of revenge. But I think again, like the only part in The Exorcist that makes me kind of like, ooh, is the masturbation scene. Yeah. Because it's like knowing the behind the scenes that it's like she really filmed that, and like I don't think you could kind of like you can't really like get away with that anymore. Like even though those are like real life horrors, and like I know those things do go on, and the entire point of horror is to kind of reflect on real life horror in a way.
Yes.
But I think like that's not for me. That's like one of those things where I'm kind of like that's why like I haven't watched a Serbian film. I know everything that happens in it, but it's like I've
seen it. I've seen it.
There's kind of I don't feel like I'll get anything out of that movie.
No,
you know what I mean.
I watched that film in film school when I was in cinematography. They made me watch that film along with I think it's like Mungo or something like that. I actually stood up and I walked out of the room. I wasn't going to watch that film anymore. I mean, I've seen. I think it was the last maybe 15 minutes of the film, but like I couldn't hack it anymore, and I just walked out of the film. Like I will never watch that film again, ever watch that film again.
See, to me, it's like because like we actually haven't like really mentioned that. We were even just saying this in the break there that like, I wouldn't even classify it as horror. I feel like if it had been something slightly different, I maybe like could have gotten something out of it. There could have been like if there was some kind of extra element to it, but I feel like you're just being grotesque for the sake of grotesque.
That's fairly evident in that film.
There's no art to it. I think that's just one of those and like I don't think it's invalid. It's a completely valid style of art. Like if you want to be shocking or if you want to be grotesque just for the sake of grotesque, like whatever, but like I don't feel like I'll get anything out of it. So that would be like my one pinky toe on the fence of like okay, but this is a little bit too much. Okay, everything else I'm pretty okay with, as evidenced by me demanding the killing of babies by Pennywise.
Oh my God.
I want to see it. Don't tell us about it if you're not going to fucking show me Pennywise ain't a fucking baby.
You will never ever see that scene. I'm so glad. You're so pressed about it. I'm so glad you'll never ever see it.
Fuck you, Andy Muschietti. You should have never mentioned it.
Alright, so now we kind of get to the point of the program. We have a top 5. We have a selection process. Well, it's not really a top 5. It's more kind of like, in no particular order, 5 movies that we selected that we think pertain to the topic that we've discussed. And some of these you would have heard already, so...
Exactly. They're just, if you want to see the themes that we've talked about explored more in full, these movies will probably help you realize where we're coming from. Nathan, if you want to go through.
The first one, obviously, we mentioned earlier on was the 2013 Eli Roth film, The Green Inferno. You know, deep friend of the pod, love him. A group student activist travels to the Amazon to save the rainforest, and they soon discover, basically, that they're not alone and that no good deed goes unpunished. Bitch! One particular film, I actually only seen this film recently, and this was one that I really thought kind of pushed body horror to a very umpteenth degree. So definitely, if you're really into body horror and you've got a strong stomach, this one is for sure a watch me movie. This film is called Bite. Basically, the plot is a seemingly harmless bite transforms a young woman into an insect-like creature that needs human flesh for her eggs. Yeah. It's so hot. I love it. This one was a very kind of hit or miss for me, especially when I watched it the first time, because I've watched this film twice now, is the French film Martyrs. Two young women who were both victims of abuse as children embark on a bloody quest for revenge, only to find themselves plunged into a living hell of depravity. And trust me, that living hell of depravity is a living hell of depravity.
The French really know how to stick it in and twist it when it comes to horror.
Yeah, literally twist
For
it
lack
in.
of a better word, yeah.
This one now, again, it like sort of pertains to that theme of, like, if I do say it, it would give the film away, but like, basically it's a film called Megan is Missing. A teenager disappears after meeting an online acquaintance, and that is literally all you need to know about this film, because that ending, fucking bleak.
Yeah, I think that's enough of a setup.
Yeah, it's all you need to really kind of say. And then the last movie on our list is Funny Games. And we're talking about the English film starring, I think it's Naomi Watts, I want to say. This film, it's the English version, directed by the same director. Now, he has said that he prefers the English version specifically because it's more closer to his original vision than his first go-around filming this film. And it's almost a shot-for-shot remake. But,
shot for shot.
Yeah.
Jinx,
literally.
nice.
It's an idyllic lakeside vacation home that is terrorized by a pair of deeply disturbed young men, and it only spirals out from there. Quite frankly, you know, it's quite it's a hard watch. It's a hard watch, that's for sure. So yeah.
And frankly, I love Naomi Watts.
Oh God, get over it.
Get over Naomi Watts, bro. She's a David Lynch muse.
So the last thing we want to make a quick announcement about is, now that we have this topic episode discussed, is we want to announce that every 3 weeks, so the last Friday of each month, we will be having a new topic discussion episode. Trust me, we've had some talks. You and me were talking last night about a few kind of things. There's some good stuff coming down the line. We have decided on a selection process for the next topic, and they are two amazing really titles. Symbolism in horror, which I think will be fucking cool, because like we can literally go off of literally anything with that one. And then we have kind of an essay choice as well. B-movie blood, excellence in cheap amounts.
I'm looking forward to that.
So that's it for today. Thanks for listening, guys.
This has been the SLAB.
A spin-off where we poke, prod, and postulate a topic for your enjoyment. As always, leave your comments, your critiques, your criticisms in the comment box below. We really, really appreciate anything you want to say to us, or anything you think we should work on or do better for. If you have any suggestions for movies to retrospect, by all means, let us know. Sound off.
We've been There Here podcast. Unpleasant dreams. It's an Elvira quote.
It's great.
Cute. Oh.